Chapter 7. We are working on a tall tale here. And many of you, boys and girls, when we were reading last week, I had a Google form with a question, seeing if you could figure out what makes a tall tale in a genre. Well, Paul Bunyan is an example of a tall tale. And all that means is that events, the truth gets stretched and exaggerated. So there's lots of examples of truth being stretched and exaggerated. The snow 200 feet deep, the table 6 miles long. Paul Bunyan, how tall he was, that he could cut down a whole forest in one swipe of his axe. All of those are examples of exaggeration, making the story of Paul Bunyan a tall tale. That's one of our categories of story, just like historical fiction or fantasy or graphic novels. It's the kind of story that it is, and it's the qualities in the story that make it. For this one, it's exaggeration. So tune in today and see what other kinds of exaggerations there are. You are going to be asked 3 different exaggerations in your Google form today for Read Aloud. So tune in, listen as we continue. Paul Bunyan swings his axe. Chapter 7, Johnny Inkslinger and his magic pen. One day a visitor asked Paul how many men were in the camp. Paul didn't know. There were Hot Biscuit Slim and his 200 cooks, Ole the Big Swede, Blackie, Tiny Tim, and hundreds more. Paul tried to count them one day at dinner, but they kept coming and going for hours. He asked Cream Puff Fatty how many desserts he made. 8,000, said Cream Puff Fatty. Good, said Paul, then we must have 8,000 men. No, said Cream Puff Fatty, because some of those men don't eat desserts, and Ole the Big Swede eats 7, except when it's strawberry shortcake, then he eats 10. So Paul gave up even trying to count the men and sent for Johnny Inkslinger to do the arithmetic for the camp. Johnny Inkslinger was the best bookkeeper in the North Woods, a tall, sad-looking man with a bald head. He always wore a large pair of eyeglasses perched on the end of his long, thin nose. He added and subtracted and multiplied endless rows of figures day and night. He became the fastest bookkeeper in the world and never made a mistake. One night he counted all of the stars in the sky and never missed one. Johnny Inkslinger kept track of everything, even down to the last ear of corn in the kitchens. His magic pen never ran out of ink. A long rubber hose connected it to a 10-gallon barrel of ink, and that is how the fountain pen was invented. Johnny Inkslinger wrote so fast that the barrel of ink had to be filled for 2 days. You are using too much ink, said Paul one day. We cannot buy it fast enough. So Johnny Inkslinger thought of a plan. He quit dotting his I's and crossing his T's. From then on, he saved 9 gallons of ink each week. Johnny Inkslinger invented new ways of adding and subtracting that are used to this day. He wrote every number down twice so as not to make a single mistake. He also invented the mistake eraser. This was a large rubber sponge to be rubbed over a page of figures. It erased only the mistakes and left all the rest of the figures as they were. Johnny finally had no use for it since he made no mistakes. He gave it to Hot Biscuit Slim. Hot Biscuit Slim used it for a while, but he never liked it. The magic sponge erased almost every figure he made. He must have got a lot wrong. He gave it to Ole the Big Swede. Ole tried it just once and it erased the whole sheet of paper until there was only a blank space where all the figures had been. It seems Ole was very poor at arithmetic. And no matter how many times he added 2 and 2, he always came up with 6. Johnny Inkslinger once tried to figure out how much it cost to feed Babe the Blue Ox, but he finally had to give it up. Every time he added up the figures, he found that Babe had eaten another barn full of hay. Then he would have to start all over again. This made him so angry that he told Paul he would quit doing arithmetic forever. Nevertheless, Johnny Inkslinger remained with Paul during all the years of adventure in the North Woods. Chapter 8. The Strange Sickness of Babe the Blue Ox. The Blue Ox was always a favorite around camp. In spite of his great size, he was always playing jokes on the men. One day, Cream Puff Fatty was out fishing in a lake. Just for a joke, Babe drank it dry while Fatty was rowing for shore. Imagine how silly the little fat cook looked trying to row a boat on dry land. Finally, Paul hired Brimstone Bill to take care of Babe. Bill wasn't as tall as Ole the Big Swede, but he was wider than he was tall and very strong for his age. He was well over 60 years old and could leap in the air and kick the ceiling with both feet. He had the hobnails on the soles of his shoes made into form his initials. Every time he kicked the ceiling of the bunkhouse, he left his initials, B.B., and you can find marks of them there to this day. Paul told him to try to keep Babe out of mischief. If left to himself, Babe would eat everything in sight. If Cream Puff Fatty put some pies out to cool, Babe would eat them all. He loved hot cakes best of all and could eat them faster than Hot Biscuit Slim and his cooks could make them for him in the kitchen stove. One day, this fondness for hot cakes was the cause of trouble for Babe. No one knew just how it happened, but Brimstone Bill noticed that Babe hardly touched his turnips at dinner one night. The next morning, the Blue Ox groaned and rolled his eyes in pain. "Babe is sick," cried Brimstone Bill. Somebody get Johnny Inkslinger." Johnny was the only one in camp who knew how to cure sicknesses of any kind. He arrived in a few minutes with a suitcase of pills. Babe swallowed the pills, suitcase and all, but it didn't seem to do a bit of good. "Open your mouth and say, 'Ah,'" said Johnny Inkslinger. Babe did as he was told. "Just as I thought," said Johnny. "His throat is all red and swollen." So they poured 25 barrels of cough medicine down his huge throat. It was no use. Babe became sicker. Johnny Inkslinger was desperate. "We will lower 6 men down into the mouth with ropes to find the trouble," said he. He told the men to take a lantern along and explore every inch of the way and to keep on going until they found out the cause of the trouble. Soon they had built a huge scaffold and lowered the men down into Babe's mouth. Down they went, past great white teeth, sliding and crawling down his rough tongue. They went down the huge passage that led to his stomach. It grew dark. Johnny Inkslinger led the way with his lantern. On and on they went until they came to the door at the entrance to Babe's stomach. "Stay here, men," said Johnny Inkslinger, "and I will crawl in and see if I can find anything." In the center of the stomach was a great black object. Johnny Inkslinger called the men, and together they tied ropes around it. Then he gave 3 quick jerks on the rope, which was the signal for the men outside to pull them up. Babe, in his fondness for hotcakes, had been greedy. He had eaten the hotcakes, stove and all. The stove was hot and, of course, gave him indigestion. In a few days, Babe was well again, but it was a great lesson to him. Never again did he put his head in the kitchen when the cooks were not around. From then on, he never ate another hot cake. And that is where we leave the story today. So be thinking about those exaggerations and be ready to share some in your Google form. Remember to use the sentence stem.